So how are we doing? Are we doing? We awake? Can you all see me? Can I stay down here, or do I need to go back on stage for the camera and all that? Is that better? I know what's behind that screen, Bill, and I'm not going back there. Thank you to our last panel. For those of you online, I know that there were a couple of questions we just didn't have a chance to get to. What we'd like to do is take some of those questions and we can send them to some of the panelists so that they could respond to that, because there was some really good additional questions that we just didn't have time for. At this point, I wanted to kind of help facilitate the last part of our discussion. We're changing a little bit of the agenda, and that's because, again, it's all about me, right? So I get to do that. So 1 o'clock we had Karen was going to do a facilitation, but I'll be taking that with Karen is going to be doing the scribing. But once again, we'd like to kind of do what we did yesterday about some of the prioritization about the things we talked about today, and any, can we move furniture? We're going to move some furniture here real quick. I feel like I'm on one of those ESPN stages. All I need is those cool brown shoes with the white soles and the big grass field. Okay. So we'd like to be able to take some of your thoughts and your ideas that have been percolating from the discussions today, from our panels, and then really combine again what we did a bit yesterday so that we can really start being able to formulate the national framework and really looking at some of the themes. And as I mentioned yesterday about the committee, or I'm sorry, the board, and then subcommittees, where we can start building those things out. Because the one thing that I think really came out from this too is it's great to have like a seatbelt campaign about wear your seatbelt, but is there a call to action that goes along with that? You know, I've been a long proponent of, after all is said and done, more is said than done. And that's one thing I don't want to have happen here. It's just a lot of things that have been said. I want to see, how do we actually get some things done? So that's what I want to draw from you, what Karen will be putting here. If there are other thoughts that you have you don't want to speak out about, you want to put on a board, we'll have some stuff over here as well. So we'll take from online and we'll take from here in the audience. So Mark Stadola. And before you get started, Mark, what we'll try to do is try to get you a mic before you start speaking so that the folks online can hear you. Mark?
Well, just very simply, let's not forget about the post-sentence population. This has been a great conference, and we've spent a lot of time on identifying this population. But over 1 million people a year arrested for DUIs, and statistically, probably a third of them are those repeat offenders. What are we going to do with them?
And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think Jim and I especially have to deal with that whole education component when it comes to community supervision, that not only do we need to be paying attention to impaired drivers in general, we need to be recognizing that a good percentage of those individuals are most likely polysubstance users. And then even on a broader sense, any individuals who are on community supervision, and there are like 4.3 million of them, they're probably drug and alcohol involved. And if they have access to an automobile, that is a DUI waiting to happen. So there is a prevention component also in that post-conviction population that we need to be thinking about.
Okay, thank you. What else?
Darren.
Oh, there you go.
That's
Howard?
what you can't see.
Yeah. Could you stand a little more in the light, Chief?
What line here?
Just kidding.
My name's Howard Hall. I'm the police chief in Roanoke County here in Virginia. I'm going to build a little bit, I think, on what Ms. Manning said a couple minutes ago. There have been a ton of good ideas over the last 2 days, a lot of them that are over there on the wall and things we heard about today. About 75% of them require as a precursor a police officer, a deputy sheriff, or a state trooper making a traffic stop. We know that traffic stops have plummeted over the last 18 months. Now, COVID's got something to do with that, yeah. Shortages in practically every law enforcement agency in this country have to do with that. The biggest part of that is the narrative. The negativity that's around law enforcement today that is discouraging people from becoming law enforcement officers in the first place, and then discouraging our current law enforcement officers from doing their work. So I think we're at a crossroads. So we can decide that we want to placate, some activists or the woke folks, and we can continue on the same trajectory that we're on, and we're going to have more victims. We know that. We're already seeing that. Or we can choose to push back on this. And there's no easy button here, right? And there's no one person or one group that can do that. We all have to do that. And myself and my colleagues have to push back against, some of the things we're being accused of and make it a priority for our personnel. And when you're someone like me who's clearly in the KMA club, so to speak, I can do that fairly easily. We need interest groups, we need traffic safety advocates, we need everybody in this room to do the same things and emphasize the importance of that traffic stop to get us to the toxicology, to get us to the DRE, to get us to the DUI courts, and all of the positive things where we think there can be impact. But it's going to take some courage. I've been a little bit disappointed lately about seeing some publications, and some of them are from some groups that are in this room, that have clearly de-emphasized traffic enforcement. You need to stop that. You need to be courageous enough to take the criticism that's going to come from folks that really don't have the best interests of society in mind, and make sure that we're emphasizing the right things. Now, I'm here to tell you that HVE stands for high visibility enforcement, not high visibility engagement, whatever that's supposed to mean. I don't apologize for making traffic stops. I don't apologize for my police officers making traffic stops. It's our work, right? It's got to be done the right way. And there's 800,000 police officers in this country. Some of them don't belong in our profession. Part of my job, at least in my area, is to make sure that we weed those out, and my colleagues feel the same way. But I think if we don't have on the priority list a move back to prioritizing traffic stops and traffic enforcement, we never maximize the potential of all the other good things that have been discussed in the last 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you. I think a point is well taken too, because everything we've talked about today up to the traffic stop is really reliant upon those DUI traffic stops. We don't do field sobriety tests, we don't do oral fluid, we don't do phlebotomy or electronic warrants, we don't do prosecution or any of that. We don't do ignition interlock. We don't do anything, even treatment courts, until we actually have somebody that's in the system to do that. So that's a critical piece. I shared this with somebody earlier. I says, if there's anybody that stops somebody for their color or their race, they have no business being in the profession. And I have no respect for anybody that would do that. I spent 25 years of my life, I put a badge on my chest every day, and I knew I was a target. Every officer in this room that's ever done traffic stops understands the same thing. And the main point here is that we were there to serve. And our motto was serve with humility. And everything we did was to serve the public. And when people say, well, you're this and you're that, that really is, it's almost disheartening to hear based on actions of some others. But I want you to know from me as the director of this NACID that we respect every single person, because frankly, I don't care where you come from. I don't care if you're purple, green, yellow, brown. If you came from Pluto, you will be treated the same, and you come with the same love and heart or respect from my heart to all those people out there, because we are in this together. We're seeing way too many people impacted. Brian is one of them. Many of you have had friends, family, and colleagues that have been killed in these senseless and worthless tragedies because people don't have the self-respect to respect others. And maybe I'm a little bit hot right now because this means a lot to me. Because when I have been to a scene and I have looked into the face of a dead person, or have had to talk to the family of somebody, and all of you in the room that have ever done a next of kin notification, you know it changes your soul forever. And it doesn't matter where you come from. You are a human being. You are somebody's son, daughter, friend, whatever you might be. And that is the most important thing, is to understand is what NACID is about saving lives. And if it comes from a traffic stop, I think the video that we just saw earlier, the second DUI he was stopped for, why did they stop him? He had a flat tire. That is dangerous behavior. Driving down a road with a flat tire, didn't even know it. So those are things we have to really think about. And yes, we have to examine ourselves always. That's what good police departments do, is they always examine. How can we do things better? How do we serve the public? How do we serve our community? But that has got to be a priority. I am off my soapbox. Just know that I love all of you, desperately and deeply. No, Stephanie.
No, I'm not allowed. Well, first of all, thank you to the chief from Roanoke, Virginia, who's not able to listen right now. Don't worry about it. And you too, Darren, thank you. I wasn't here for this brainstorming session. I don't know if this was talked about before now, but I do hope it's included in whatever the discussion was. This is a turning point. This really is a turning point. The numbers are going to keep going up unless our community, which happens to be very white, the traffic safety community is very white, and that is part of our challenge in terms of working with this administration, who is very focused on equity in every form, and in Congress and in state legislatures across the country. Our victim volunteers are dealing with this everywhere right now. Anytime we push any bill, an interlock bill, anything, this is what we're asked about. Even though our folks say, well, how does this tie into equity? It all ties into this equity discussion. So I think we have to, as a community, do a really good job, or a better job, of talking about traffic safety enforcement that is fair and just. Fair and just. And I know some people have a hard time with that, but we can't even get in the room at the table with the administration or Congress or many state legislatures unless we talk about it that way. So regardless of people's beliefs, regardless of how you view this sensitive issue, as a community, we have to do better with the way we frame it. And fair and just enforcement gets us in the room at the table. So keep that in mind in these discussions. We've got to frame it differently, and we've got to push the enforcement for hazardous driving behavior. So thank you.
Thank you. Brandy, anything online? Anybody else? Chief.
And I just piggyback on Stephanie. I think, and we heard, especially yesterday, we heard the word equity used a lot. And we talk about equity and enforcement. But I think one of the things that's important, and especially if you look at GHSA's analysis of what's been going on, if you look at the increase, the disproportionate increase in fatalities, injuries in the past year, you see that it's the communities of color that are disproportionately impacted as victims. And so when we talk about equity, we need to talk about equity in safety, the same as we do as equity in enforcement, because those community of colors deserve to have safe environments and be in safe environments just as much as anybody else. And I think at peace when we start talking about equity and enforcement, and somehow that means we need to pull back. And that's the reality. We're pulling back in those communities of color, and they're suffering as a result of it. So we have to have equity and safety. That's key.
Thank you, Chief. Jim?
I just want to build a little bit about what Mark was talking about post-sentence. To get to an effective sentence for folks, we need kind of system-wide change. And that starts with early assessment soon after arrest. I've seen some jurisdictions implement things like SBIRT and quick, screening and assessment right away to get people into services who need it. And also to minimize risk, because we're letting people out of jail. They're not sitting there forever, right? So if they're going to be in our communities, we need to know they have programming, whether it's to minimize risk or to maximize treatment. We need to make sure that they're there. And is there a defense counsel anywhere in this room? They need to be at the table too, because they're a large part of this. And along with prosecution, to me, they're the first steps in like speeding up that process and stopping with the diversion and stopping some of all this other things that, I get it, due process, but the quicker we can get people in their services, the safer our communities are going to be too.
Thank you, Jim.
I would say minimum standards for evidence-based programs and practices for DUI offenses. I know it varies state to state, but across the board, one DUI is too many, but that's still an opportunity to intervene before there's a second or third offense. So making sure states are doing whatever they can for those offending to go through a program that will actually help reduce recidivism.
Thank you.
So an example, in my state, Nevada, if you get a DUI, you can find an online program that's 4 hours and really means nothing. It doesn't do anything for the offender. They could be behind the wheel as soon as they get their driver's license back. In a state like New York, doing the right things, they are forced to go through a 12-week program that's mandated by the DMV in order to get their driver's license back. So I think that utilizing those practices at a minimum will help, that second or third offender that's high risk.
So I wanted to ask a question, and maybe some of the prosecutors in the room can ask this or can answer this, but even for our law enforcement folks, when you have stopped somebody for a DUI, do you automatically have information that says this is their first, second, third, or fourth offense? Minnesota, you can. Other states, no. Prosecutors, when you have a case that's proposed to you, do you actually have something that you can easily go to pull and see if they've had DUIs in your state or other jurisdictions?
We did in New York, where I was a prosecutor, we could, when I was a prosecutor in New York, we had access to run DMV checks. So before we went into either traffic court or another court with the defendant's file, we could do that if the officer hadn't run it before all the citations were issued.
Yeah. And there's no uniformity. The problem is there's no uniformity in the way it's reported. So whether it goes into the system from the actual court itself, and then many of the states don't talk to each other. So to get a full kind of view of that person, like nationwide, we find that you have to go through Colorado court data, the DMV, and then you have to look at NCIC and multiple state searches depending upon who's part of the interstate compacts or not. And then some states are much easier to work with than others. So there's a huge gap there. And then getting record, like if we have to prove, get it.
While the mic's over here, I'll kind of finish that off from the law enforcement side. I think most places it is available for an officer to get if they want to. It doesn't like pop up automatically when you run a license. Most places, there are a few states that pop up automatically, but generally an officer can get that, but it's not a common practice for a number of reasons. One being just logistics and time delay to deal with that. And secondly, most officers would tell you they don't necessarily want that information before they evaluate a person and make the arrest decision, because at some point we're going to be accused of having a biased opinion about their sobriety because they were previously arrested for DUI or something. So I don't really need or want that in the first place, honestly.
So the reason I'm asking this question is some of you in your states have second, third, fourth DUI as a felony. And if you don't have that information, especially at the prosecutorial level, how do you know how many DUIs to actually charge them? You know, as far as their sentences go up, what's the information? Is that a gap that needs to be addressed? Because, and the reason I bring this up too is there was a federal bill that was going to come up, and it was going to actually penalize states if not all states were putting their DUIs into the National Crime Information Center. The big question, though, was how do you actually get somebody into the NCIC system? And so at the time of the arrest, how many times are the DUIs actually fingerprinted and their cards put in at the time of the arrest? Very little. Bill?
So it's not the availability of the information, it's when you get it. I can only speak for New York. You're not supposed to get the driver history until you've effected an arrest. Once you've effected the arrest and it's no longer prejudicial, that information is easily available in New York, depending on how many is depending on what you get charged. So it's when you get the information, and having it before doesn't really matter. I mean, you judge that case as you see it.
Correct. Yes. I was just going to say but then how do we make sure that that record for a prosecutor themselves being able to pull and say, okay, I didn't realize that this person, they got a DUI here in Washington, but they had 2 other DUIs in New York, or a third in, Nebraska, and making sure that you're charging those DUIs accordingly. And that's kind of what I was asking. Is that something that NACID could be exploring and working to do? Yes, please. Okay, that's all I needed to know. Casey?
Yeah, I think we should start rewarding people to change the behavior in the form of rides. We should pay for their rides or transportation if they are a second offender. I think if people have third or fourth drink, I think we should have a way to come together to pay for the rides.
Okay. Did you get all that? Reward people for changing behavior. Okay. Good. What else? Commander Orsino, anything? You sent me an email. I hate email. Brandy, anything online? So, and you can think for a moment. I'll let this settle on you for a second. But as we've talked yesterday, and we've talked today, and we've got several items over here as prioritizations or some ideas, what do you see from your perspective as maybe the most important place to start? We've got great ideas and thoughts, but what do you think is something that we could do right away? Say that again, right here, Chuck.
Educate the public, educate the legislature, educate.
And who do you see doing that education?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about, but I mean, in many states you can't. Yeah, there's a separation of powers between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Some of my peers can go talk to them. I think you could in Washington maybe, but not in New York. So you got to have MADS, you got to have NACID, you got to have those groups going and doing the advocacy work.
So more of like a coordinated effort, working through your state highway safety office, for instance, to make sure you know that we're having those conversations.
Yeah, to the extent that you can. But there's just so much misinformation out there. I mean, you think about it, we live and eat and breathe and drink this stuff day in and day out, but some of our closest partners don't even understand this stuff.
Okay.
So how do we expect the public, how do we expect judges, how do we expect police officers to know all this stuff?
Okay. That is a good first start, building a foundation. Okay.
Yeah, and Darren, that sums it up, is along with that education, is we have to raise the profile. The more that profile and the more that issue is out there, the more attention it's going to get, and the more interest the policymakers are going to have in getting the information right.
I will ask some of you, if I was to say to you, in your state, who would be the #1 traffic safety champion in your Senate or your House? Do names pop into your head? So we can work to coordinate with some of those types of champions. I saw some people go, I don't think I have one. So, but that's a key piece. Just one second, Leo. Russ, we'll go with Russ, and then if we get the mic over here to Chief.
So a lot of the things we've talked about, or a lot of things that are on the wall, are like tactics. Like we want to implement this kind of program or to do this kind of thing that's very targeted. I don't mean to be the guy that like has a hammer and so everything looks like a nail, because I work in government affairs, but I see a lot of the things we talk about in its base, the solution is in legislative engagement. And so should our strategy top load legislative engagement? Because we want to buy a bunch of stuff, we want to buy materials, we want to buy services, we want to change policy to allow us to do those things. So I think that NACID can start with a coordinated effort on both the federal and state level to change policy to allow us to do everything on the wall and get us all the money to pay for it.
So great point. Kind of operational actions, tactics, have some goals and objectives that align up with that. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I was just going to say to you, absolutely, we know who will back us or who is a champion of whether it be traffic or any other thing in our state legislature. So yes, we know who to target and who to talk to start that bill going. There's a lot of modifications of it, but we do know who to go to.
Okay, thank you very much. That's good. Chief Sharp, and then we'll go back to Paul.
It's good to talk about legislatures. It's good to talk about state. And I think the what we heard yesterday from Matt was spot on about the fact that you got to have courageous police chiefs to making sure that their officers are trained, equipped, and doing the things like that. It's not the legislature, it's the city councils, it's the boards of supervisors, it's those areas that are going to have the resources, the training, and the policies that are going to be set. If a mayor or council or a city manager hires a police chief and says, we don't want traffic enforcement, you're not going to get traffic enforcement. So that education that we're talking about isn't, when you say legislature, it's legislative bodies like your local areas, but it's got to be, it's the police departments that has to be it. It's the police departments that abandoned traffic safety. They abandoned traffic safety during the recession, they abandoned it during the COVID, and they're abandoning now because of the environment. And so we need to have courageous police chiefs that are willing to stand up and say traffic safety is public safety, and we're going to commit to it, and we're going to make sure that it happens. And it's not going to happen if you have a mayor saying, I don't want you going out making traffic stops. So we got to really get to those elected officials.
I think we mentioned this a while ago, I think in some of our Highway Safety Committee meetings, but is there a way that we can get into like the National Mayors Association? What's that? Conference of Mayors? National League of Cities. You know, these are the kind of things, as you start breaking that down, is where can we have the greatest impact? And being able to connect in with those things. So that might be another really great place to do that, is we have legislative engagement, and then maybe at the another bullet particular here would be, or maybe it's just legislative body engagement. I don't know. Okay.
International group. I'm sorry, ICMA, the International City Managers Association. So those are the kinds of areas and all, because they're not educated about the importance of this. They're the ones that are giving the resources to Parks and Recreation instead of the police. And so, you know, there's got to be that emphasis on that. And I'm not downplaying Parks and Rec. It's important to a community, but they're not saving many lives in Parks and Rec.
So there's that piece of with the municipalities, but then also with counties and how we work with that as well. I think it's very important, that coordination. Good. I know that we had, let's see, Brandy?
There was an online suggestion of grants for local municipalities. This suggestion was through the Alcohol Beverage Control in California, but building on Danny's comments, maybe there's opportunities for local grants as well.
Okay.
We also have one here in the back.
Oh, Paul, yes. Sorry, Paul.
We have to reduce the number of known unknowns. To the extent we don't know how big a problem it is in a particular place, we have to persuade people that they need to spend some money to find it out. Whether it's in conjunction with pilot programs funded by the federal government or funded by multiple jurisdictions, and doing it on an incremental basis, we need to find out how many people are engaged in polydrug use rather than just stop all the testing at alcohol.
So as an example, maybe you would be thinking about reinstituting the National Roadside Survey. Does everybody know what the National Roadside Survey is? Where we screened several states, and we got to see back in 2013-14, we saw about 22.4% of the people that had substances in their body at nighttime, and 22.5 on weekends. So there really wasn't a lot of difference. But what we were seeing is a significant increase, even at that point, in drug use. So, but where have we been for the last 7 years? And you make a great point, Paul, is the National Roadside Survey is something that I think we need, because we don't have good data in this country. Flat out. We just do not have it. And we need that to make good decisions. And the question is that intentional? That we don't have that data so that we can't act? Or is it just an oversight or we just don't want to offend somebody? Really, it's about how do we know the scope of the problem to actually create solutions to the problem. And that's where people like Brian are enormously valuable. Absolutely. Absolutely.
To answer your question really quickly, I'm sorry, I won't take time. We don't have the data because politically people stand in our way of getting the data. We've had so much trouble with that survey federally forever. We've had to fight and fight and fight. Certain members get involved. They don't want people stopped. No matter how much we argue that this isn't an imposition, a privacy issue, it's people who, certain organizations that tell members no, and they stand in our way.
And that's where maybe we can help bring people to the table that have been in opposition and have those conversations and address that. And this, for me, I don't have a problem with bringing folks to the table. And so, I think you heard from Amy. She said, okay, we're at the edge of the cliff. You ready to jump? I said, let's go. And who knows what's at the bottom, but we're jumping. And so we're willing to do that. Brian?
I would just say that we can't rely on government, right, to solve these issues all the time. We know that if we get the private sector and those people maybe that they have a lot of money, they maybe have been pouring that money into things that they've just been accustomed to pouring money into, right? It may be 10 years, 20 years, they've been doing the same thing. We have to get to those people and convince them and let the government, right? They can follow those leaders. This has to be a private-public partnership, in my opinion. And because if we're waiting for an $800,000, $1 million grant from the government and trying to deal with all the politics of that, that becomes difficult. So I would say, make sure part of what we're doing, I believe in, there's a lot of philanthropy. I can't say it. I'm a youper, so I can't say that word, but you know where I'm going with this. I think there are, Paul, I think, right, I just think there's a lot of groups out there. We have to get to the right people and bring them to the table on this issue, because this is a public health issue. I think that's a good message for these.
And one possible group are pastors. They will care about their congregation. They will care about their flock. And if they have people in their flock that they're losing, or that have friends or family members who've lost someone to this, they may be very willing to take our side, or at least listen.
And I think it's interesting is oftentimes we find a bigger problem just from the traffic stop with the impaired driving piece. They have a much bigger issue. But also, how does it actually impact a family, a community, as far as quality of life, when we can take somebody off the road and we put them in that cycle where they actually they're no longer addicted, or they no longer have a substance abuse problem. How does that also help the community? So the traffic stop isn't just about stopping somebody and trying to ruin their day. It's about how do we improve the quality of life? And that oftentimes we get that person from the traffic stop and we can actually put them in a whole nother realm where we can actually help change that life that's either addicted to alcohol, drugs, or whatever. Casey? My esteemed colleague from the Governor's Highway Safety Association.
Darren, I just want to say you just described what engagement is when we talk about, and GHSA is one of the organizations that talks about equitable enforcement and engagement. What you just said is engagement. It's helping people. It's not about the ticket. It's not about the stop. It's about how do we make lives better for people. And I think that's one of the things that we need to think about is how are we going to make people's lives better? Because this is a serious public health issue. People don't understand that. And it's not about putting them in jail. It's not about the ticket. It's about making their life better. So what you just said, rewind the tape, that was it.
That's your soundbite.
That's soundbite. Sold.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate that because it is about that. And I'll just be a little bit vulnerable here. My oldest son, who's 30, several years ago, he went through a significant substance abuse problem. He was addicted to heroin. And my wife and I, we pushed through a lot of issues. I have been taken down roads that I have never, ever thought I would go down. And so I have a lot of understanding and sympathy, and maybe even some empathy towards some of these folks. It doesn't mean that I condone the behavior, but I certainly understand some of the circumstances. And now watching him with his 3 kids and a completely different life, I know and I have seen and I have witnessed and experienced how we can see people's lives actually change. So I know that there are ways that we can do that. And through all of the programs, almost every person, every panel that we've had in here has talked about how we can actually be that conduit, help make change. And where did Judge Vlavianos go? You know, when you were saying in your work is, you know, they need somebody that's kind of that, you know, I think kind of the keeper of the keys, and they have someone to focus on, is that they need that. And finally, after, you know, some time with my older son, you know, he and I, we butted heads for a long time. And finally, there was a time where I was that conduit for him. And so, but they need support. They can't do it alone. They need that support. So that's what I think. And I'm not trying to be, you know, mushy here, but just realize and understand that we have the ability to see people's lives change. I don't think we came in our positions just to get a paycheck. We really wanted to be I think a gatekeeper to see lives change, to be a part of, you know, improving our communities and the quality of life. I think there's lots of different ways to put that, but ultimately that's what we're trying to do. So, okay, anybody else? Anything online, Brandy? Okay. I think well, 1 second, I gotta grab something. Thank you, Sam, for not letting me forget. I really appreciate your feedback, your information, your candor. I think this has been a great opportunity to be able to explore some different ideas, different thoughts. It was great hearing somebody saying, "Are you saying that?" And realizing that what they had known is not what they thought. And that's kind of how we all are and how we need to go back and educate. Joanne was saying, now go tell 500 of your friends. And I was kidding over here saying, now that's like that old Breck commercial. And you tell 5 friends, and you tell 5 friends. You remember that? Yeah, well, I want you to go tell 500 of your friends about all this. And that's kind of where this begins, with your family, your friends. And it's part of how do we help change the culture. Shelley, you talked about culture. And one of the things that you talk about in culture is kind of a social ecology. You know, the culture within your own family, and how does that go to your, you know, to your own neighborhood, and then to schools, and then to work, and then to the broader community to where it's like this national piece. And so how do we help change that? And so I appreciate all the comments. We've got a ton of feedback. Now, with the National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving, our next steps really are about taking this, building out a national framework. We will have, like I mentioned in my remarks yesterday, the steering committee, a board, and that, which will all be formed up because we've just got a few more members that are coming on, and that's being finalized, so that'll be built out. And then we will have this. I do not want to lose the momentum that we've gained here today, or actually yesterday and today. So thank you for that. I appreciate all the participation, the engagement both online and in person. I know it's been kind of heavy at times, but I really appreciate you sticking in there for all of this. I want to thank particularly all of our folks around the room that from responsibility.org and Discus. Thank you so much for your patience, your perseverance, and making this an outstanding conference. So I would just have you ask if, was this awesome? And that really, you know, the details, all the information, the food was amazing. I mean, at least I thought it was. And that was the most important part. But really it really comes down to all the people behind the scenes that make all of this work. And for all of our moderators, all of our panelists, thank you so much for the time, the preparations, the information. The video, all of the slides will be available to you on NACID.org. I believe it'll be on Monday, Sam? Yes, sir. We will also have additional resources on there from some of the speakers. If there are others of you that have some resources that you would like to share with us on NACID, we're more than willing to incorporate that. That would also hyperlink back to your own webpage and that kind of thing. But if there's other links that would be good for you to be a part of that, please join those with our NACID. And I always have this tendency where I write everything down and then I can't read it. Yes, trust me, I'm a doctor. I just wanted to just share with you, just as we close up here. A little over a year ago, we started this process. Jake Nilsson from AAA, Russ Martin from GHSA, Karen Spratler. We started building this agenda and kind of exploring all the different ideas. And we had an agenda that we were going to use last year. Then COVID hit, and after the first of the year, we came back, we revisited it, and we scrapped almost the whole thing. And we kind of rebuilt it. And I'm so glad that we had that time to really think about, contemplate, and bringing this together because, you know, there was a mind melt here that came together from Jake, Russ. I think, Jonathan, you were on some of those calls with us. Brandy and Karen is bringing this all together so that we could bring a quality program to you as our launch and letting you know how serious we are about moving forward and building out this plan, building out some next action steps, how each of you can play a role in that piece and be a part of that. Sitting next to Brian, and I'll take some couple of your words, Brian, every panel, he's like, oh my gosh, these people are amazing. They are like brilliant. And I'm like, let's go be careful with the brilliant part. But the level of expertise, the experience that you bring to this, and I hope for our folks online, is really seeing that we brought some of the nation's experts in this field on this stage. Now, I know we can't do everybody, and I know there's a lot more out there that are heavily involved in this, but what an amazing presentation this has been over the last few days. Talked about that. Oh, I also wanted to just, Chief Danny Sharp, if you just wave your hand. Chief Sharp is the retired chief from Oro Valley, Arizona, and he is currently the chair of the International Association of Chiefs of Police Highway Safety Committee. And many of those Highway Safety Committee members are in this room, if you just wave your hand. And we really appreciate you coming in early to be a part of this and being able to help support your meeting tomorrow and Sunday. This is a partnership. This isn't a one size or one person show. This is really about us. Appreciate Mike Sable being here for the National Sheriff's Association and the things that we've been doing together. And are you going to be here tomorrow too? Okay, drats. But I just wanted to say really thank you for being a part of this, Chief, and for having your members here and seeing how we continue to move forward despite some of the challenges that we face. Is how do we continue to move forward without losing ground? So thank you. For those of you that have signed on as members to NACID, thank you. We're excited to be able to build this up together. For those that have been sponsors, not only for the conference, but also corporate sponsors for responsibility.org and with the National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving, really appreciate all the things that you have provided to us. And so this is the only way that we're going to be able to get things done, is having strong supporters, strong sponsors, and some funding to be able to do some of the activities that we've actually outlined here. Our funders have provided us with quite a bit of money to get us kind of that catalyst. And then it's really about how do we bring on additional corporate sponsors? How do we bring on additional members to help keep this momentum going? So if you have somebody with the Gates Foundation or Bloomberg or whoever, or with maybe Tesla, if they're going to put people in space, it'd be nice if we could use some of that to take care of here as us on planet. But really is to really help that. We have the one-pagers. Joey Ford over here, if you'll just wave your hand, he is our membership director, and he can help with all of that. This is not a, come write a check to me right now speech, but just understand that we have a lot of things that we'd like to do, and it's going to require some resources to do that. Brandy, if you would wave your hand in the back. Last year when I was hired, she said, "This is your baby, make it work." And I was like, I've never done that before. But we've brought a good crew together, and everything that's happened over the last 2 days is really about teamwork. And so I really appreciate everything that has been done. And I've heard some amazing feedback from many of you. Look in the next day or two in your email for an evaluation that will be coming out. We'd love to hear some feedback on all of the aspects of the conference. If there are new thoughts or ideas, there's a spot on that evaluation that will say, is there anything that we didn't talk about? Anything that we should consider for even our strategic plan piece? We really want to have your feedback on that. I'll just ask you, we weren't planning this, but I just wanted to ask you, is this something that you would like to see again next year? Okay. I just wanted that on record. So when we go back to the bosses, because this has been great. And I've also heard too, is there any way that we could take some of this on the road somewhere around some of the states? And I don't know how we would do that, but hey, just like when I talked to Amy, let's explore it. And I'm willing to have those conversations and explore and see, and if we can't, we can't. If we can, let's make it happen. So, but with that, I just want to say thank you, safe travels, and anything we can do to support you and anything that you're involved in, please let us know. Remember, we love you.